You'll find repetitions all over your story while you're editing it. Sometimes they can be hard to see because people often put the same information in different ways, so it can sound like different ideas. But repetitions, they tell your audience to pay less attention because the information they're getting, it's repetitive. Some repetitions, they're pretty obvious. Often in that first edit, where I just put everything on the timeline, I'll end up with 3 different versions of a main idea, like what the organization does or why the work matters, some key point that I probably asked them about multiple times in the interview. So in the first pass, I'm just looking for the best version of those statements. Often the best version is actually contained maybe in 2 different versions. Maybe in one bit, they explain the need of the community really well and passionately, but then how they fill that need, well, that might feel a little practiced, maybe a little tired. But in another part of the interview, they just nailed talking about filling the need. Well, great. Use the good setup from the one part, then edit that together with filling the need part from later in the interview, the part you liked. A lot of times that's all I'm doing on that first pass, just looking at the flow like we talked about a couple lessons back, and then putting together the best bits to make it sing. I'll let sections stay a little long for now. I try to make everything less than 5 minutes each section, but I'll let that slide if there's good stuff in there. I just want to get rid of those major repetitions. Now there's no definite order I follow as I look for other repetitions, but for the sake of making a list here, let's pretend that there is. So next, I start looking for ideas that are repetitions, but maybe not so obvious. A good example of this is one that used to happen all the time back when I was working with the young Americans with their workshops. I'd often have kids who would talk about how they loved the workshops, but also tell how much they liked the young Americans, the actual members of the group. And sometimes they'd say very different things, but in the end, they were really talking about the same thing 2 different ways. The workshops challenged them and helped them to grow, and so did the members of the group. Different language sometimes, but often the same idea. I'm a little embarrassed how many times I had to catch that in an edit. One way that can often help to catch those repetitive ideas is go back to note cards. I do this to revisit the structure of the video as well. I'll look at each section and I'll write down sometimes a name for it, but definitely a very short description of what this section is about. And often there, while I'm writing that description, that's where I'll see that some sections cover the same material or have overlaps. Then I go back and figure out a way, maybe to remove one section altogether, or often how to combine those sections and use the best part of one and the best part of another to make a tighter and more effective single section. Then I go looking for little repetitions that people do in their speech all the time. This can be tough because sometimes repetitions call attention to how important something is. So maybe someone says about their work, "I love it. I really love it." Well, that's an obvious repetition, but it might be a meaningful one because it shows their passion through the repetition. But before I let that pass, I want to look at both sections of it. The first, I love it, and the second, that more emphatic one, because it's often tempting to only look at the first section and then just see the second section as the repetition. But you can remove either one. What if they say, "I really love it"? That might get the point across more simply, and it's tighter than the repetition. The passion, it's still there. It could even be better. It's a judgment call and one worth making. If the piece is running a little long, sometimes simple cuts like that can do a lot. I'll usually try to err on the side of making it shorter. Let's take a look at this in an interview. Here's an unedited clip.
While the family advocate is working with the family doing paperwork and talking about resources in the community, our interviewer will come in and take that child for their interview. So they'll take them to the interview room and go ahead and start that process. When the interview is taking place, we have investigating agencies in an observation room that are able to observe that. They're able to see and hear what's going on.
The repetitions may not seem obvious right away, but there's a lot of information that's given twice. The interviewer taking the child to the interview room, that's repeated, and the agents in the other room that they're observing. She explains what observing means, which is just a repetition of saying they observed. Take a look at this in an edited version.
While the family advocate is working with the family, our interviewer will come in and take that child for their interviews. When the interview is taking place, we have investigating agencies that are able to observe that. They're able to see and hear what's going on.
It's the same information, just a lot tighter. And seeing the repetitions, it can be really tough. But let's end this lesson with Jerry Seinfeld. The New York Times did a great interview with him about how to write a joke. It's about 5 minutes long, and you should look up the whole thing, but here's the part that can help sum up what we've been talking about in the last couple of lessons. Finding the flow and editing it down as tightly as you can.
So now I'm looking for the connective tissue that gives me that really tight, smooth link, like like a jigsaw puzzle link. And if it's too long, if it's just a split second too long, you will shave letters off of words. You count syllables, to get it it's more like songwriting.